In this video, we are going to talk about fear, mental illness, and existential epistemological dread. If this is something that makes you uncomfortable, then you might want to skip this video. But if you are a-okay engaging with this conversation, then welcome. I also do just want to list a quick spoiler warning for the following stories: The Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountains of Madness. With that out of the way, let's get started. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us a little, but someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. H.P. Lovecraft, The Call of Cthulhu. Over the last few weeks, we've explored H.P. Lovecraft's stories, looking specifically at fear and madness. If you haven't watched those yet, the links to them are in the description below, and you should really go check them out, because this video probably won't make a ton of sense without them. So stop this video, go watch those ones, and then come on back. Whether it's the fear of not knowing, or the madness from knowing, knowledge is at the center of the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. But why? What is Lovecraft trying to say about knowledge? First, let's review. Lovecraft wrote a lot about fear and about madness. He evoked a fear of unknown and unknowable things, which played with the discomfort produced by being confronted by the uncanny. Not knowing is uncomfortable at best and terrifying at worst. Lovecraft also wrote a lot about madness. When characters poked around and delved into deep, dark places to search for answers to deep, dark questions, when they tried to resolve the uncanny, they went mad. Learning those secrets drove people insane, and creative, imaginative, intelligent characters were even more susceptible to this madness. Knowing, even just the desire to know, was dangerous. So here we have a conundrum. We're given a sort of paradox of knowledge. Not knowing something, having something be unknown to us, is frightening. It's uncomfortable, it's bad. But knowing something, having secrets revealed to us, drives us mad. It's also bad. So are we doomed to choose between living lives of ignorance, never asking questions but living in fear, or learning about the world and going mad from all the awesome and awful truths of it all? Or is there a middle ground? Is there a line between fear of the unknown and danger of the known? Is there a spectrum of knowing? How much knowledge is enough? How much is safe to know? Is anything safe to know? Or are our lives condemned to be pendulums, constantly swinging from fear to madness, madness to fear, living in perpetual discomfort and uncertainty and insanity? Is there such a thing as safe knowledge? The study of knowledge is known as epistemology, and it's one of the oldest branches of philosophy. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the actual philosophical theories because it's kind of a lot. But there are a couple of important and interesting thought experiments posed by epistemology. Imagine that you and a friend are trying to make a decision, and because you are both very indecisive people, you've decided to base your decision on a coin toss. You flick the coin in the air, it rotates a few dozen times, and then you catch it. Immediately, you cover the coin with your other hand so that you can expose the result in a big, dramatic reveal. But until the coin is exposed, what is the state of the coin? Is it heads? or is it tails? Is it definitively either? Is it both? Neither? This is similar, as I'm sure you've noticed, to the famous Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. If you have a cat in a box along with a lethal Rube Goldberg machine, until you look into the box to confirm the state of the cat, alive or dead, then the cat is considered to be both alive and dead simultaneously. Now, while Schrödinger was a quantum physicist and not a philosopher, his thought experiment has been used by philosophers to question the nature of reality, of facts, of paradoxes, and of how we know what we know. The coin problem and Schrödinger's cat are both more complicated ways to ask the question, if a tree falls in a forest but no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? While physically the answer is surely yes, we still need to ask, how can we be sure of that? How do we know that reality exists outside of our observations? Metaphysics and epistemology are intertwined in the question of whether or not there is such a thing as unobserved reality. But what does this mean for our initial question about the power of knowledge and its role in the fate of our minds? Well, there isn't really an answer to this. Philosophers and physicists and poets have been asking these questions for thousands of years without a real answer yet. There are no facts or data to give a concrete, objective conclusion, but there are theories. Lots of theories. Centuries worth of theories, in fact. There's the idea that nothing is real, that everything is real, that it doesn't matter what is real or not, the only thing that matters is what we perceive and interact with. There's skepticism, there's rationalism, there's nihilism, and no one has the answer. We just have lots of maybes. One maybe, one theory of how knowledge and reality interact, that is particularly interesting and applicable to us is the idea that knowledge creates reality. You see, we have this idea of facts as some kind of objectively correct interpretation of reality. But what differentiates a fact from knowledge? How do we know facts? Well, this theory posits that knowledge isn't really a thing on its own. It cannot exist independent from a person. Knowledge, instead, is a link between a person and a fact. Reality may exist outside us, but knowing is what connects us to reality. Knowing something makes it real, gives it power. Think back to the coin toss example from before. The coin has landed either heads or tails, that's a fact. But as long as you don't uncover your hand, this fact remains unknown. It is not yet within the realm of knowledge. Nor do facts become knowledge simply by being written down. If you write the sentence, "This coin has landed heads" on one slip of paper, and "This coin has landed tails" on another, then you will have written down a fact on one of the slips, but you still won't have gained knowledge of the outcome of the coin toss. The fact, the reality, is there somewhere, but it's not known, so it holds no real power. Knowledge demands some kind of access to a fact on the part of some living subject. Without a mind to access it, whatever is stored in libraries and databases won't be knowledge, but just ink marks and electronic traces. There is no knowledge that dangles unattached to any subject. Unlike water or gold, knowledge always belongs to someone. If knowledge equals reality and knowledge must be attached to someone, then if you are the only person who knows something, you are the single thread that attaches that knowledge to reality. You are the person who makes that thing real. The only person. In Lovecraft stories, knowledge is a dangerous thing. It doesn't just drive people mad, but it gets people killed. In The Call of Cthulhu, our protagonist Francis Thurston is going through some of the old documents from his recently deceased uncle. His uncle, Professor George Angle, had been studying an enigmatic cult and its connections to maritime disasters and some mysterious carved statuettes. Francis sees that this research is unfinished, and it piques his interest, and he decides to finish it for his late uncle. The uncanny elements of this small statue, of the eerie notes and letters from his uncle's informants, of the odd, globally ubiquitous dreams had by artists and scientists of some gargantuan, terrible beast rising out of the ocean, these things lead Francis to travel around the world seeking answers to his questions. What is the figure in the statue and the visions? What caused the dreams and the disasters? Who are the cults and what are their goals? And ultimately, how is all of this connected? Francis follows the trails of information and he ends up in Oslo, Norway, where he wishes to talk to a retired sailor named Gustav Johansen, someone who, according to reports, was one of the only survivors of one of the maritime disasters that, according to legend, was caused by a great beast. When he goes to the Johansen house, however, he discovers that the man has died, and his late wife says that he had returned broken from his trip and ended up dying in a freak accident, which Francis attributes to an enigmatic and mysterious murderous cult. Francis finds that Johansen had left a letter recounting his experience, written in English so his wife could not read it. In the letter, Johansen describes his journey, which started out normal but ended with him and his crew landing on an odd island covered in immense, unearthly stone monoliths in shapes that should not even be physically possible. The crew inspect the great unnatural architecture and, during their inspection, discover a giant door in the ground leading down to some mysterious depths. They, of course, open it because human curiosity is unending, and then, out from the door, out from somewhere deep underground, comes a beast. A monstrosity unlike anything any of these men have seen before. A scaly, tentacled creature as tall and foreboding as a cliff face, an unearthly, unknowable, unreal thing. Cthulhu. Johansen managed to escape back to his boat and outrun the being, and ended up being saved by another vessel at sea. He came back home, told an abridged version of his story to the press, and wrote down and then hid his unabridged, fully detailed version, and then was killed by the cult of Cthulhu for what he had seen. That tale, on top of the information gathered by his uncle and by himself, is where our protagonist Francis ends his own story. That was the document I read, and now I have placed in it the tin box beside the bas-relief and the papers of Professor Angle. With it shall go this record of mine, this test of my own sanity, wherein is pieced together all that which I hope may never be pieced together again. I have looked upon all that the universe has to hold of horror, and even the skies of spring and the flowers of summer must ever afterward be poison to me. But I do not think my life will be long. As my uncle went, as poor Johansen went, so I shall go. I know too much, and the cult still lives. Cthulhu still lives too, I suppose, again in that chasm of stone which has shielded him since the sun was young. His accursed city is sunken once more, for the Vigilant sailed over the spot after the April storm. But his ministers on earth still bellow and prance and slay around idol-capped monoliths in lonely places. He must have been trapped by that sinking whilst within his black abyss, or else the world would now be screaming with fright and frenzy. Who knows the end? What has risen may sink, and what has sunk may rise. Loathsomeness waits and dreams in the deep, and decay spreads over the tottering cities of men. A time will come, but I must not and cannot think. Let me pray that, if I do not survive this manuscript, my executors may put caution before audacity and see that it meets no other eye. Francis Thurston knew too much. He had learned too much. He made connections between things and about things that should never have been made. The knowledge is what killed his uncle and what killed Gustav Johansen. And it is what will kill him too. All of these men tried to protect the world from the knowledge they had gained. Professor Angel hid his documents in a locked case. Johansen wrote his story in a language his wife, the inheritor of his belongings, did not know. And Francis ends his tale with a plea to his killers: don't let anyone else see this. For the good of humanity, don't let anyone else learn what I have learned. And yet, none of these men made real permanent moves toward obscuring or destroying the knowledge that they had found. They said that they wanted to protect people, yet all they did was make their cursed knowledge all the more enticing to the prying eyes of those who would seek it out. They could have destroyed what they knew. They could have burned the documents, thrown the statuettes in the ocean, never written down their memories, taken them to their grave. But they didn't. Why? Knowledge is dangerous. Knowledge is a responsibility. You know something, you are one of the only people in the world to know something, then you are the one responsible for keeping that knowledge. Because without you, without anyone to know it, it wouldn't exist. But knowledge is addictive. It holds on to you and begs you not to let it go. It's a virus, a disease that gains power the more people it infects. And like a toxoplasma, it takes over its host. And it drives them even against their own well-being. Because without the host, it would die. For Lovecraft, knowledge of a cosmic horror, knowing something that should have remained unknown, means that you have brought that cosmic horror into reality. You have confirmed the existence of something that could end the world. And if this weren't terrifying enough, imagine being the one person to know of the existence of such a thing. Remember the coin example from before. If knowledge and reality are intertwined, and knowledge must be attached to someone, then reality is too. If you and you alone have the knowledge of a preternatural monstrosity, then you and you alone are that thing's tie to humanity, to reality. You are responsible for it. You have been cursed with knowing of its existence and thus giving its existence meaning and power and reality. It's no wonder so many of his characters went mad. They learned things that no human mind should have come in contact with. They were faced with things that were outside human comprehension. They were shown a reality that was so terrible that they either had to convince themselves it wasn't real, or they had to accept it and understand that they, as the sole person who had learned of it, were its sole connection to humanity. It's no wonder why so many of his stories start with the protagonists not wanting to talk about their experiences. They know that the more people know about something, the more real that thing becomes, and they don't want what they know to be real. In At the Mountains of Madness, our protagonist William Dyer is giving an argument. He's trying to convince another group of scientists not to travel to the South Pole to do research. To do so, he tells the story of his own Antarctic expedition and the terrible knowledge that he came back with. Now, he has to tread a fine line here. He doesn't want to tell too much because what he knows is dangerous. He doesn't want to curse anyone else with the awful knowledge that he holds. But he also needs to give good, concrete reasons why the Southern expedition shouldn't go on. And he's arguing with scientists who notoriously need detailed justifications for things. He has to decide how much knowledge is too much, what the safe amount is. And ultimately, he decides to tell them everything. Everything, that is, except the one vision that drove his friend mad. The one thing that sent him over the edge. He'll tell them everything else. He'll tell them all the dark details of the creatures that came before the Earth was formed. He'll tell them about the great albino penguins that inhabit the furthest reaches of the South Pole. He'll tell them about the barrel-shaped, star-footed aliens encased in ice and the immense and formless slime creature that hunts them. He'll tell them about the sounds and the smells and the fear evoked by those beasts. He'll tell them about how he and his friend ran for their lives through the tunnels and streets of a physically impossible and ancient city. He'll tell them about the secrets of time and space and life itself. But he won't tell them about the final image. The thing that his friend saw out the back window of their plane as they flew from the ancient, icy, cursed city. He won't tell them because if he did, then it would be real. These examples don't really answer the questions that we posed at the beginning. How do we know what we know? What role does knowledge play in our reality? Because there are no answers to these questions. Not yet, and probably not ever. Ultimately, there is no such thing as certainty. Not just within the field of epistemology, but within all of philosophy, within all of life. We don't have any answers, even though we are always looking for them. Humans are really good at asking questions. The universe just isn't good at providing answers. So we come up with our own, as flawed and incomplete as they may be. Nothing is really known. Even science is just repeated approximations of reality. When we do experiments, we just create a petri dish of our universe and poke and prod until we get information that we then filter through our own fallible brains and then spit out on the other side. The discomfort of knowing that we will never really know anything, is what Lovecraft was exploring. So what does this mean? Does this mean that we should never ask questions? That we should give up on science and art and just live in the dirt, churning out a useless, meaningless existence? Probably not. Lovecraft felt that knowledge was a worthwhile endeavor. He just also thought that it was a dangerous one. That knowledge, that knowing too much, could be damaging. But he was also a bad guy. He thought too highly of himself and was bigoted towards others. He thought that some kinds of people could never access certain kinds of knowledge, or enlightenment, or philosophical greatness. For him, knowledge and understanding of the universe, if accessible at all, was only accessible for the white, the educated, the cultured, the well-bred. He also believed the maxim that knowledge is power, and with great power comes great responsibility. So for Lovecraft, the white, educated, cultured, well-bred people were responsible for collecting and protecting the world's knowledge. Collecting it for themselves, but protecting it from feebler minds. For those who were afraid of asking questions, afraid of the unknown, but also those for whom knowledge would be a real danger. Those weak, uneducated people who, if given access to such powerful, dangerous, awesome knowledge, would use it only for selfish, or worse, ends. So, maybe we shouldn't take our epistemological ethics from a raging racist who lived 100 years ago. But what does that leave us with? What do we do with this? Well, one option is to keep looking. To search out knowledge unafraid. We should keep thinking about these questions, the questions that are unanswerable, but that are still worth asking. We need to keep thinking about the dark things, keep looking into the depths of our universe and ourselves. Knowledge of all of these things may be dangerous, We may not like what we find, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying to find. Or does it? Is the darkness around us too much? Too dark? Too unknown? If we keep looking, who knows what we might find? What kind of answers might lurk there? What kind of unknowable terrors lie just outside of our reach? And if we find them, what then? Knowledge is power, and it is what keeps us tied to reality, but what if we discover knowledge that's outside reality? Outside what we can even fathom? What then? What happens to a person's mind when they are faced with something truly unknowable? Is it worth the risk? Is asking these questions even... You can never unknow. So you must be careful about what you let yourself learn. Knowledge is a dangerous thing. Wield it cautiously. Don't make the same mistake I did. It is absolutely necessary for the peace and safety of mankind that some of the Earth's dark, dead corners and unplumbed depths be let alone, lest sleeping abnormalities wake to resurgent life and blasphemously surviving nightmares squirm and splash out of their black layers to newer and wider conquests. H.P. Lovecraft, At the Mountains of Madness. This video was made possible by the paycheck from my college administration, who won't let me teach the way that I want, which is why I am making these videos in the first place, and by viewers like you, who donate to my Patreon, linked in the description below. Thank you!